Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Russian gas exports via Soviet-era pipelines running through Ukraine came to a halt on New Year's Day, marking an end to decades of Russian dominance over Europe's energy markets. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has declared the cessation of Russian gas transit through Ukraine as one of Russia's biggest defeats, accusing Moscow of weaponizing energy and resorting to blackmail. So what happens to the countries who were previously supplied through the pipeline? Well, to explore this and related questions, we're joined by Sergei Erofeev. He's from Rutgers University and a regular contributor. Sergei, welcome back to TVP World. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Hi, Ashim. Good to be with you.
Good to have you, sir. So before we start our little chat, there is a video that I'd like to share with you and our audience. It is our correspondent in Ukraine who filed this earlier.
As expected and as promised, Ukraine has indeed halted gas supplies coming from Russia, transiting through Ukraine into Europe. Now, this is significant. It's been causing consternation with the countries that receive that gas. It amounted to about 5% of the Russian gas, 5% of Europe's gas coming into Europe and mainly catering to Austria, Hungary and Slovakia. And there's been a major dispute between Kyiv and Slovakia about this, particularly with Robert Fico coming out quite strongly, promising retaliatory measures if Kyiv followed through. While Kyiv has followed through now, the Energy Ministry publishing saying it was in the interests of national security. Zelenskyy also made comments about this, saying Moscow was turning energy into a weapon. He had some critical remarks, calling it the hysteria of politicians who prefer the mafia-style energy mafia that Putin is running. And say in this statement, Zelenskyy said, when Putin was presented with the Russian presidency more than 25 years ago, the annual gas transit through Ukraine to Europe totaled more than 130 billion cubic meters. Today, it equals zero. This is one of Moscow's biggest defeats. Indeed, this deal was worth at least $5 billion per annum to Russia. It was thought to be worth about 800 million to Ukraine each year. So they're going to be losing from this as well, but not as much as Russia's state energy company, Gazprom, is going to be losing from this. Now, there is still one more route into Europe. That's the Turk Stream pipeline that facilitates Russian gas into Europe. But as far as Ukraine is concerned, that's it. The deal has not been renewed, the 5-year deal. And going forward, Russian gas is not going to transit through Europe. How that affects Europe remains to be seen, whether that will drive up gas prices, energy prices in general, whether that's going to cause more problems, more friction between Fico and Zelenskyy. That remains to be seen. But for now, all we can see is that Ukraine definitely has followed through and that Russian gas is no longer transiting through Ukraine as the 3-year mark of the war approaches.
So that was Oz Chatterjee reporting from Ukraine. So, Sergei, impact on Russia of the non-renewal of this contract?
Well, for Russia, the worst things have already happened. Much greater losses were incurred at the beginning of the war. And we know that the Russian funds are frozen in Europe and the United States of America. So I don't think it really matters so much in practical, physical terms for Mr. Putin, but he can, again, like with many other things, turn this into another impression management game. Who knows what he will say about the role Russia plays in it, in the change situation. He will definitely proceed with more blackmail and bluff. That's the nature of his behavior. And your correspondent just rightly mentioned the word mafia, mafia-type dealings and weaponization of energy resources. I would just like to add that this should not be considered as a figure of speech. Mafia-type behavior is not a mafia-type behavior. It's not a value judgment. It is mafia behavior. That happened in Russia as a country 20 plus years ago, when representatives of very archaic culture, which we can associate with the word mafia as a sociological term, captured the state. And since then, Russia has been behaving seemingly not always in its own interests, because the interests of the country and the interests of the ruling mafia, they're different ones.
You're right. Okay, now, understood, but I want to focus on the impact of the end of the gas transit through Ukraine. In your opinion, does it have much of an effect on the amount that Putin has in his war chests to fund the war, or is he simply going to replace this with his shadow ships and the Turk Stream pipeline?
The thing is that the pressure should be mounting on Putin from every corner, a little bit here, a little bit there. Everything diminishes his overall capacity to continue the war financially. And we can clearly see that the pressure in terms of much larger sanctions against Russia continues. And there will be growing pressure of a secondary nature, secondary sanctions, in order to stop this grey fleet, as you say. In just absolute numbers, the losses Putin is going to incur with this transit halt to Europe are not going to be really very dramatic. There are other things, and there are many other signs testifying that he's running out of resources. If the dictator and military aggressor like that has to resort to hiring North Korean soldiers, this means he's not really doing well at all. And we know the mood and the situation of the Russian mercenaries who are they're freezing now in the battlefields of Ukraine. This is far from perfect. Putin is wasting hundreds and thousands of human lives daily and weekly in order to proceed just a few hundred meters.
Right.
This is not how big wars are won.
Understood. What about the impact of the loss of the revenues that this pipeline used to give to Ukraine?
Well, obviously, Zelenskyy and his government have carefully calculated the combination of gains and losses in this situation. So the political and the military gain is obviously overweighing those losses that Ukraine is going to incur from losing this contract with Russia. One might ask even a different question: why till now this step hasn't been taken? Why not at the very outset of the war? That's a good question, because many people were left wondering why in 2022, 23, and 24 the gas was still streaming to Europe through the territory of a country which aggressor is bombing and killing its citizens. So that's one of the paradoxes, and it stems from the difficulties of understanding the nature of Putin's regime, Putin's rule. As I said, that many still use the word mafia as a figure of speech, not as a technical scientific term. If we had the ability, I mean, we Western political leaders, if they had the ability to define Putin's rules from the very beginning as this criminal and mafia type, they would have had much easier times to stand against Putin in every respect, including cutting off these lines at a very early stage.
Right, so you can't solve a problem without first defining it, and there seems to be...
Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Right.
So the Western leaders are still lacking this clear understanding. This can be present in the changing behavior of, let's say, the French president. President Macron, at the very beginning, clearly displayed a kind of Munich syndrome. And he's been changing, even mentioning things like French boots on the ground in Ukraine as a possibility. So this is changing, but the overall framework is still lagging far, far behind. It's called cultural lag. So the reality is going forward. But the understanding is lagging behind.
Understood. In the last couple of minutes that we have left, Sergei, Slovakia, Slovakia, like other EU countries, has had the opportunity to replace the gas it was receiving from Russia. Same with Hungary, and they've used LNG, for example, from the United States, Norway and other places to do that. Why hasn't Slovakia in particular done so?
Well, every country in Europe, especially these new European countries, smaller countries, they have the right to play their own games. There are different predispositions of the populations of these countries, and there are different political groups, interest groups. And Mr. Fico apparently came to power using some sentiments in the Slovak society when he was trying to get enough power to become the leader of the country, in order to play with some rudimental atavistic feelings and the fears of moving forward too quickly. It's understood. In social psychology, it's called omission bias. And conservative leaders very often play with this omission bias when people prefer not to change the status quo, not to choose a better solution, and try to drag on and on with what they have, despite the dangers which they can face. So this omission bias is a very typical social situation in which Slovaks find themselves. They are not ready to take the message well enough that they have to be patient for a little, or maybe not so little, but then the gains for the entire Slovak society will be higher. So these conservative and right-wing leaders, like their prime minister, they're playing with this syndrome, which is called omission bias.
And there is a price attached to that in this particular circumstance. Sergei Erofeev, thank you very much for sharing your analysis with our audience. And have a Happy New Year, sir.
Happy New Year to TVP.
Thank you very much. Good night. And that's all from us in this edition of World Talks. Don't go away. Lots more coming up. Bye-bye.